Splendor sets the sun before the hours of darkness come. I hold this comfort through the night. My loss you wrap in golden light will rise again in greater splendor. My golden light of yesterday. There is no death, just sweet remembrance of greater glory that's on the way.
If you open your Bibles along with me, we are in Luke chapter 18 presently. A couple of weeks ago, I was parked on the outskirts of San Luis Obispo, waiting for my wife. After 40 years of marriage, I've become good at waiting for my wife while she is doing girly things. She's there in town doing a couple things she had to do. And so I sat there in the car in a residential area, and as usual, I'm trying to stuff as much as I can into the moments of life that I have. Always, I'm not good at double tasking, but I try anyway. And so sitting there in the car, I've got my taxes on my lap, and I'm trying to sort through and get prepared. Got my computer there, and I'm kind of working on that. And I see this old guy. I'm always careful now when I say old guy. Anyway, I see this old guy coming down the sidewalk, and he is kind of shuffling along, and he bent down. He was already halfway there, and grabbed a rose, literally a rose there, lifted it up, and he smelled the rose. And I thought, wow, he did it. I watched him do it. I said, I want to do that when I grow up. I want to learn that, look, even if you're not what you used to be, maybe there's something, he's already moving slow. It's a little bit easier to stop when you're not going that fast to begin with, and he's already halfway there to the rose, and he takes that as an opportunity to smell the rose, and I thought, that's great. And you know what, I think I am growing up a little bit. You may have noticed here in the Gospel according to Luke, here in Luke's Gospel garden, there are a lot of roses. There are a lot of fragrant flowers, a lot of beautiful vistas, things that I'm in no hurry as we go through the Gospel of Luke. It's not like how many weeks, how many months. I really don't care as long as I am growing and learning and seeing things. And so as we've gone through the Gospel according to Luke, a couple verses at a time, we look at it, we gain a few things. At least I do. I hope you do. You keep coming back unless somebody's forcing you to. I hope you're learning and growing. But one of the things that you lose when you go that slow is you lose a sense of the pacing. You lose a sense of this was a story. It was something that Luke expected you'd sit down and read, and it wouldn't take all that long to read or to have it read to you. And there's a very definite flow to the course of this gospel. And just to remind you about that, since we have been going so slow, a real pivotal point is the last verses of chapter 9, and I'll just read it to you. But it says there in chapter 9, verse 51, that it came about when the days were approaching for his ascension, that Jesus resolutely set his face to go toward Jerusalem. And he sent messengers on ahead of him, and they went and they entered a village of the Samaritans to make arrangements for him. And the Samaritans wouldn't receive him because he was journeying with his face set toward Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and burn them up?" And he turned and he rebuked them. He said, "You don't know what kind of spirit you belong to. For the Son of Man didn't come to destroy men's lives, but to save them." And so they went on to another village. But there, it's that scene in which his face is set toward Jerusalem, and there's a momentum through these next 9 chapters or so. And really those verses I just read to you is kind of a picture of the way it flows for the next 9 chapters or so. Jesus is moving toward Jerusalem, and there's this growing crowd that's coming with him. He's saving people, he's helping people. Many of them who are saved and helped, they join this building entourage, this caravan moving toward Jerusalem. And he sends forth his messengers, and oftentimes his messengers are just messengers in the sense that they make a mess and they injure. They're messengers. And when they do that, it's kind of not a surprising thing. And it's not something that the Lord says, can I get where's the second squad, get these guys off the field, let's put in some others. That's just kind of typical. It's right there at the beginning. He sends his messengers out, and James and John say, should we torch this town? Because they won't listen, they won't hear what you have to say. It's kind of that way every chapter, right up until the end when Peter lops off the ear of a bystander who just wouldn't listen to the Lord. Lord, they're not listening. Should we cut off their ears? They're not listening. Should we torch them? You don't understand. I didn't come to sever, to cut, to tear down, to destroy. I came to save. But that's pretty typical of the messengers. They're messy messengers. But Jesus, the Messiah, he's the mess eraser. He's the mess fixer. He's the mess redeemer and restorer. And so while they saw this, here's this caravan heading toward Jerusalem. They saw the same thing, but they saw it through entirely different eyes. They saw themselves as the great gladiators going forth. We are the messengers, and they kept making messes and kept figuring out that, why don't we get it? Well, they didn't get it because they didn't really listen. And as they were moving along with this entourage, they really weren't necessarily moving along with the Lord. They were out of step in so many different ways. And all of this is not to put them down. In many ways, it lifts me up because it makes me see that, look, a lot of times when I mess up, it's no shock to God. It may be a disappointment to me, but the Lord picks people. He handpicks people who he knows will often make mistakes. And so we see that with the Lord's disciples. And from their standpoint, they thought this caravan heading toward Jerusalem was going to, like a march on Washington, D.C., this mighty march that's going to go to the Capitol, and we're going to take over the government. We're going to lower taxes. We're going to do something great. When they got there on what we call Palm Sunday, they thought that's the climax of this caravan. We've entered the town. Save now, Son of David. They're calling out to their local Jewish king, Son of David. Save now, Son of David. Make Israel great again. That was the way they were thinking. And Jesus, of course, wept. He said, you don't understand the things that make for peace. But that's the kind of crowd that's going along with him. And those are the kind of messengers that he would send before him. And the Lord wasn't shocked to find that they made messes. Anyone who's raised children is never shocked to find that those who've gone before you make messes, and you spend so much of your life just fixing and cleaning up and saying, no, that's not what you're going to grow up to be one day. That's who you are right now. I understand it. I love it. But that's not who you're supposed to be. And so the fact that the Messiah is going around as a cleaner up of messes, it may not fit our picture of the mighty Christian army, of this great entourage, onward Christian soldiers. No. He's not raising an army. He's raising a family. And from then till now, he understands that a lot of those who go forth in his name say and do a lot of things that do a lot of harm. And yet still the Lord loves them. And still the Lord cleans up. And still the Lord corrects. And that's what we see through all of these chapters. And that's what we see, again, here in the section we look at today. How different we are than the Lord, and how much we need to grow up. Someone's not listening. Torch them. Someone's not listening. Whack off their ear. Jesus always had this attitude. What spirit are you of? The spirit of Jesus was always, if you can hear it, hear it. If you've got ears to hear, then you're ready to hear it. If you're not ready to hear it, you know what? You're just not ready to hear it. But let's not get frustrated. Let's not get angry. Let's not lose hope. You're just not ready to hear it as yet. And that's the way the Lord moved. That's the way it was in these chapters. I don't think things have changed all that much. I think still today people are often like these messy messengers, especially those who see themselves as the messengers of God. I think most people who have a message for me, people who really show me things about God, they're usually not trying to show me something about God. They're living their life, and I see things about them, and I say, wow, that's kind of like that widow that no one would have noticed, who put in the 2 pennies, and Jesus called all his disciples. They're excited about the big buildings, and he says, no, here's something big. Did you see what that woman did? I think that's just the way it is. The people I learn the most from aren't trying to teach me anything. But those who are trying to teach, those who are trying to lead the charge, those who are trying to teach the church, those who are trying to jump out in front, they often, just like then, still today, can be very messy messengers. And that's probably not surprising to this little group here. I think it might be very surprising to people on a larger scale. I wish they knew that. I wish they heard that, because oftentimes we blame God, we blame Jesus for the messengers. We see the mess that's being made. I know a lot of people who wouldn't set foot inside a church. Why? Because they've heard the church leaders. They've heard the people out front. They've heard the ones who say, look, we're leading the charge. And it wasn't even God's Spirit. And yet they spoke as though it was his Spirit. They don't know what spirit they're of. Jesus made it clear to his disciples. He said, you guys have to watch out for that subtle influence, that leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Don't you let that leaven grow inside of you. He said, it's inevitable that there will be people in the way, stumbling blocks. Don't you be a stumbling block. Don't get in the way. Don't stumble others. Don't insert yourself in that place. All of that was said. Jesus told his disciples that. We read, he said that over and over. Why should we blame him for the fact that his messengers are messy? Or that many people jump in front who never were called to be in front? Why should we be shocked? And Jesus told his disciples what they needed to hear. But you know what? Little secret. They didn't listen. They didn't listen. Guess what? We still don't. So oftentimes we still don't listen. So here we are. Maybe if we go a little slower, we might. I don't know. I don't think it has to do with speed. I think it has to do with what's going on in our hearts. But I hope that we learn a little bit more here again today. When Jesus talked about the coming of the kingdom, don't look at Palm Sunday. It's nothing like that. The coming of the little kids we see here in chapter 18. That's what the coming of the kingdom is like. It's like the coming of the kids. And here we've read in chapter 18, verse 15, they were bringing even their babies to him so that he might touch them. He was picking up the babies and holding the little toddlers. But when the disciples saw it, they began rebuking them. The messengers are making a mess. The messengers are being messy. They began to rebuke. And Jesus, the mess eraser, the one who fixes things, he called for them. He said, no, permit the kids to come to me. Don't hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a little kid, like a child, will not be able to enter in at all. That's kind of typical of this section. And then the next story, the rich young ruler, he doesn't come up like a little kid. He comes up like a rich young ruler, and he comes with a good desire, but he's got the wrong idea of the kingdom, like so many still today. And he comes up, oh, good teacher, what good thing should I do that I might be able to inherit this life? And when he comes up with the wrong idea, it's no surprise. We've read the story. He walks away sad because he just had the wrong picture, the wrong idea. And as he walks away sad, this is how far we got last week, when this rich young ruler walks away with his heart just crushed, the disciples, and I assume that Peter, the one who speaks first, is probably speaking for all of them. The disciples, rather than feel compassion for this guy, Rather than say, look, here's this guy who's got something going on in his life that he can't let go of. Something that holds him back from happiness. Something that keeps him from freedom. And when he walked away sad, rather than them feeling compassion, any sorrow for this guy that just can't let go, Peter blurts out with the slogan, behold, we can. Behold, we have. He couldn't let go. Who cares about him? We let go. We let it all go. It wasn't just a yes, we can sort of slogan. It's, look, we have. Behold, we have. We've done it. And once again, the messengers, I hope that rich young ruler didn't hear the disciples saying that as he walked away. I couldn't. But look, we can. And Jesus, again, the fixer of the messes we make, makes it clear that look, you can't outgive God. Whenever you give something, don't ever think in terms of you gave it up for God. You can never outgive God, and you can't give up good things for God. If you give it, it's a good thing, and it's only to receive better things. Jesus said that, verse 29, truly I say to you, there's no one who has left house or wife or brothers or parents or children for the sake of the kingdom who will not receive many times more right now in this lifetime. And in the age to come, you'll receive eternal life. Don't talk about, oh, look, we have, look what we've done. We gave up things. No, don't you know you are so blessed? You hit the jackpot. We don't give things up for God, but he removes a lot of our sicknesses and a lot of our senselessness and a lot of our handcuffs and hang-ups. And yeah, this guy was still chained to something. That's a sad thing. You guys are free? That's great. That's a wonderful thing. But again, he sets things straight, and then he says one more thing. Luke doesn't have it, but it's important that we understand. Right now, he also says, but many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first. He makes it clear that okay, you guys have been blessed, and this guy is, by his own hang-ups, being held behind, but you know what? Don't celebrate the way you guys are celebrating. They had this hang-up about first and last, who's the best, who's the greatest, all this competitive stuff. So all of that, we've looked at all of that. That's essential context. And then it says, verse 31, he says, then he took these 12 aside, pulled them aside, little special lesson here. And he said, behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and everything that's written through all the prophets about the Son of Man, not just the Son of David, but the Son of Man, all of it will be completed. It will be accomplished. For he will be delivered to the Gentiles, and he will be mocked and mistreated and spit upon. And after they have scourged him, they will kill him. And on the third day, he will rise again. Now, in Luke's gospel, if you were just reading it straight through, you might, if you were taking notes, see that this is the 7th time that he's talked about his suffering, talked about the fact that he would die. And with each time he tells it, it gets a little bit more graphic. A little more information is given. The first is very subtle. The first statement is the bridegroom will be taken away. And what does that mean? But as the story moves on, he says a little bit more, and it's in terms of the bad news. The bad news just gets uglier and uglier with each time he tells them, because I don't think they could handle, I don't think they ever could handle all that much in terms of bad news, because you get stuck on the bad news. And so each time he talks about it, and if they would have listened, each would prepare them for the next, it got a little bit uglier. And here are the details actually coming out, being spat upon and scourged and mocked and all of this stuff now coming. But the one thing that's the same is the promise of the being raised on the third day. That's always the same, because that was supposed to be the place. Hopefully for you and I, it is the place. That's where you focus. The bottom line is the bottom line. And if you don't hold on to the fact that he raises on the third day, you have no hope in all those dark and ugly things. And you'll never be able to listen to him and never be able to endure him in your own life. It's the resurrection story, the resurrection hope that gives us any chance of making any kind of sense of the senseless stuff that we go through. hope in dark places. That's always the same. Now, you've heard that. You know that. Look at their response. Read how they responded. In verse 34, it says, "But they understood none of these things, and this saying was hidden from them, and they didn't comprehend the things that were said." It's almost like Luke is struggling for words. 3 different ways he uses different words to say kind of the same thing. They didn't get it. They didn't get it. They didn't get it. It's, again, a pattern you see throughout the Gospels in regard to our darkness, our density, our deafness, our blindness, our whatever. And again, it's not physical senses, it's moral sense, it's our soul, it's something inside of us. But there's just something about 3 times, knock 3 times, and I still don't get it, you know. On the 3rd day, after all of our darkness, he rises again. He still is going to accomplish everything he's going to accomplish, but there's just this sense in which sometimes we just don't get it. And Luke uses different words to say essentially the same thing. They didn't get it, they didn't get it, they didn't get it. And the middle phrase, perhaps a little more interesting, it says, "This saying was hidden from them." And we know it wasn't hidden by God because God is revealing to them. But it was hidden all the same. In other words, they didn't get it because they couldn't get it. And they couldn't get it because it was hidden. And it was hidden not because God caused it to be hidden, but just, that's about as far as I can go. But that's not to make an excuse. Sometimes we're afraid, oh, don't make excuses for them. They should have got it. It was hidden. Yeah, you're making an excuse. No, I'm not making an excuse. But it was hidden from them. Kind of like the guy addicted to his riches who walked away sorrowful. He's got no excuse. I could have let it go. Well, good. Then that's not your problem, is it? You could let it go. This guy couldn't let it go. Let's have some compassion. He couldn't let it go. This was hidden from them. It wasn't God's fault, but there was a fault. There was something sad. Of course it's inside of them. We've all got some pretty sad things inside of us. And to say that they couldn't see it because it was hidden is not to make an excuse, but doesn't it inspire a little compassion, I hope? Kind of like, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Oh, they knew exactly what they were doing. I'll show you this chapter and that verse. They knew they're culpable, they're guilty. No. Even when we seem to know what we're doing, even when of course we're guilty. And no excuse for us, but there is forgiveness. And there ought to be compassion. And the fact is, they just couldn't get it. And if you and I were there, we wouldn't have gotten it either. And it's not God's fault. Well, the problem is basically, if you've never noticed this in life, and if you start to notice it and it worries you, let me just assure you, I've noticed it, and you're not alone. People just believe what they want to believe. They do. They just tend to believe what they want to believe. They tend to see what they want to see. They tend to hear what they want to hear. They tend to remember, even in a courtroom, what they want to remember. And are they conscious of that? No. Is it human nature? Yeah. Is it there with those who are leaders and those who are in the forefront and those who are messengers as well? As long as they're human messengers, yeah. And that's sometimes why they make such a mess. But Jesus still chooses people with those kind of weaknesses. And he still reaches out and he still forgives. But those are the weaknesses that we have to deal with, and why we ought to have compassion toward others, and why we ought to realize we're not going to learn a lesson by beating it into ourselves either. If you could pound it into someone's head, don't you think the Lord would have just pounded them over the head? I mean, he could have done it. There is that time where he said, let this sink into your ears. But even when he said that, it wasn't like he thought that he could just take a plunger and push it in. It still is, if you're ready to receive it, receive it. But the fact is, a lot of folks are just not ready to receive stuff, so don't torch them, don't lop off ears, and don't pull out the plungers. Just accept the fact and have some compassion. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. I don't think at all Jesus was trying to get through to them. Because if he was trying to get through, then he was failing, and I don't think Jesus ever failed. I think Jesus was leaving some time capsules for them and for us. And he tends to do that. He tells us things that, and here it's recorded, he told them. Things that he knows they're not going to get. He knows that they can't get right now, but he's going to still tell them. Why? Because later when they wake up, they can go back and open that time capsule and say, but you know what? He told me. And it's not like, oh, now this is a club. Pull the club out of the time capsule and beat myself over the head. Look, if it didn't work then, it's not going to work now. Don't beat yourself up. I should have known. He told me. He showed me. I should have known. No, he knows you didn't know. So have some compassion and mercy upon yourself. Just open the time capsule and see that, you know what? He's always been with me. And he warned me then, and I didn't listen. And he told me when I was young. He told me through my parents maybe, but the fact is that I was young. So, okay. I've got no excuse, but it'll help me to deal with the forgiveness I need, because the fact is I'm weak and I've failed in many ways. And like any people traveling on a journey, you know, if you've ever read the reports of like Lewis and Clark or any adventurers going out, it's always wise to store up essential provisions, caches of food and water and weapons if need be, in places so that later we know where those caches are. We know where those things have been stored. And you know, all of us are time travelers. The Lord isn't. He dwells outside of time, but we all travel through time, and we can't go back, but we can remember. And the Lord puts these time capsules. He says things. He records things. We might remember things. And you go, oh, he was with me then. And I should have known. And he told me. And he gave me warning. And why didn't I listen? I'm going to beat myself better next time. No, don't do that. I guess you just weren't ready then. Maybe you're not ready now. Are you? I hope so. Because if God's got something to tell you, it's always good news, even if it sounds a little scary, even if it sounds like, oh, the bad is getting badder. It's uglier and uglier. No, the bottom line is always good. Be hopeful. Understand that your Lord, he loves you. And so for them, they're still his messengers, no matter how messy. They're still the ones that he wanted. He prayed all night and he picked them. And you know what? Of course they're going to fail. And right now, the sad thing is they think they're successful. They don't think they're doing hardly anything wrong. It's not till later, when you really grow up, that you look back and think, man, how many times, how many messes have I made? But understand that the Lord, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. He's loved you with an everlasting love. And so they couldn't get it at that point. And it says, verse 35, that it came about that as he was approaching Jericho, a certain blind man was sitting by the road begging. Now, hearing a multitude going by, he began to inquire what this might be about. And they told him that Jesus of Nazareth was passing by. And he called out, saying, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And those who led the way were sternly telling him to be quiet. But he kept crying out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and commanded that he be brought to him. And when he had come near, he questioned him. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus said. He said, Lord, I want to regain my sight. And Jesus said to him, receive your sight. Your faith has made you well. And immediately he regained his sight, and he began following Jesus, glorifying God. When all the people saw it, they gave praise to God. Now that little story, the last one here in the chapter, it's in Matthew, Mark, now again in Luke, and probably more than most stories, the three different camera angles of the gospel writers gives us not entirely different stories. If they were entirely different stories, then we'd probably say it's a different story. We know it's got to be the same story, but Matthew says there was two blind men. Mark says there was one, but the one's name was Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus. And Mark talks about him as though he were someone who was well known to those that Mark wrote his gospel to. And that's probably the case. One talks about them going into Jericho. Another talks about them going out of Jericho. And my concern this morning is not to try to reconcile those three different camera angles and see how they might all fit together. To me, they're each like a different flower. Each of them, if you got time, savor it, smell it. There's something beautiful, something unique to look at in each of those recounting of this particular story. But being that we're here in Luke's gospel, there's one thing in Luke's gospel that isn't said by Matthew or Mark, and it's in regard to the response. When this guy was saying, "Have mercy on me," when this man was crying out for mercy, this man out of his need looking to the Lord to be his help, Luke alone tells us the response. It says in verse 39 that those who led the way were sternly telling him to be quiet. Those who led the way were rebuking him. It's the very same word, rebuke, as back there in verse 15. They were bringing even their babies to Jesus that he might touch them. But when the disciples saw it, they began rebuking them. It says that those who led the way, they were saying to this fella, "Hold your peace," sternly rebuking and saying, "Hold your peace." At least in King James English, "Hold thy peace." Doesn't that sound, that's kind of, you could do that in church. Hold thy peace, brother. That's King James English. Essentially, they were saying, shut up. They were rebuking him and just saying, would you shh, be quiet. Jesus is passing by. Those who led the way, Luke tells us. Luke alone tells us that. Specifically, those who were in the forefront, those who led the way. The folks out front. Who do you think they were? Based upon all that we've read, based upon everything we've seen so far, who do you suppose were the folks out front in their Jesus parade? Who were the ones most anxious to get to Jerusalem? Because when we get to Jerusalem, we're going to pull out the palm fronds, Hosanna, Son of David, and which one sits at which seat in cabinet positions, because we're coming into our kingdom. The mothership is coming in, and we are out front because we can't wait to get there. Who do you think might have been in the forefront? Who do you The messengers. Again, the messengers who are sent out in front. Was it the 12? Wouldn't surprise me, at least. I don't know for sure, but it's certainly those who led the way, those who were out front. But thank God the response for this blind man, even though he was being rebuked and told, he's not like one of the little kids that could just be rebuked. Jesus had to step in there. This guy isn't going to take it. The folks out front are saying, "Shh, be quiet." And this guy kept crying out all the more. Look, I can cry mercy over your telling me to be quiet. I can cry out for mercy. Son of David, have mercy on me. You go, bro. Have mercy on me. And you know he will. He always will. His mercies never come to an end. You see, this guy wasn't born blind. There were people born blind that Jesus healed, and that's an amazing story in itself. You've never in your life seen. And now, this guy lost his sight. We don't know how, but he knew what he was missing. He knew what it was to see, and now he knew what it was to be blind. And sometimes a long, dark journey prepares you for things like nothing else could. And he's been on his dark journey, and when Jesus, the great coming king, the one who all authority is going to be in his hand, when he essentially gives him the blank check and says, "What do you want me to do?" Name it. This guy isn't, hung up on riches and power and things that may be addictions or troubles for other people. This guy's gone through his dark journey, and he knows, look, man, I just want my sight back. All this other stuff that I used to think, maybe like all of us, you think so important. Once you've gone without for a while, you realize what really is important. And how wonderful the Lord, who often waits for us to want the right things, now says, okay, you can have that thing. Because you want what's really true and what's really right. Jesus said, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, because they alone will be satisfied. Until you want what's right, you'll never be satisfied. The rich young ruler, doesn't matter how young, rich, or how much rule he has, you're never satisfied. But when you want the right things, you don't worry, you will be satisfied. Everything written in all the prophets about the Son of Man, not just the Son of David, the Son of Man, the Savior of man, it will come to pass. Are you ready? Are you willing to walk with him? Are you willing to receive his compassion and his love in spite of who's leading the way? In spite of the front runners, the folks who get ahead of the game and talk as though they're his spokesman. Can you get past them? I hope so. Can you just say, look, you guys say I shouldn't even be here, but you know what? God, have mercy on me. And all those who seek mercy will find mercy. And all those who give mercy will receive mercy. That's the promise of the Lord. Blessed are the merciful, they shall obtain mercy. So here's this guy, he knows what his need is. When Jesus says, what do you want? He's freed from a lot of other things that might tempt you and I. We have a lot of ideas of what might satisfy. But again, you go through a long, dark journey in life. That's one of the benefits of having gone through it, is now you know, look, I know what I lost. I know what I need back. And he's merciful. He's good. So that's the story. And you know, there are so many things I think that you can see in this story about the healing of the blind man. But let me just, got a couple minutes left, and I will totally exceed them. But let me just summarize a few things that I see. Number one, don't follow leaders. Follow the Lord. A lot of those who say they are the leaders, they're just in front. And many times they're just in the way. Don't follow leaders, follow the Lord. It says in verse 43, immediately he regained his sight and he began following Jesus. There are blind men and there are blind men. When you really gain sight, you see Jesus. And you start to follow him. He's the one I hope in. He's the one I trust in. Secondly, I'd point out, and you see this throughout the Gospels, but here again, Jesus has no concern regarding name recognition. He doesn't pass out T-shirts with the name of Jesus on it, you know, little ball caps, Jesus. He has, in fact, he said at one point, people can insult Jesus in any way they want, and it can be forgiven. You can blaspheme my name because it's only because you don't know my nature. When you fight against the Spirit of God who's good, that's a core problem. But people stumble over names, and Jesus was never concerned about Christian marketing. He was never into the Jesus brand. Brand recognition, Jesus. He called himself the Son of Man. You brand cattle. Psst, Jay, mine. You love sheep. And when you love sheep, maybe the sheep don't even know the shepherd's name. They're sheep, but they know his voice. They know who loves them, and they follow him for that reason. And so immediately this guy regained his sight, it says, and they began following him, and they were glorifying God. God, not even Yahweh. Certainly not Jesus, just God. They were glorifying God, and when all the people saw it, they gave praise to God. Not a lot of branding or name recognition there. Jesus was not concerned about it. In fact, Jesus told all of his disciples, do your good works in such a way that when men see, they glorify your Father who's in heaven. That's success. They glorify our Father, our common Father, with his wondrous love that works among the brethren. That's the result that Jesus looked for, and it happened here. I'd remind you, based on this story, that those who are front runners in any given point in time Who's out front? Who are the front runners? They aren't always in first place. The first shall be last, last first. The front runners aren't always in first place. That's just the place they're in right now. They're front runners. And sometimes front runners are just running a front. It's a facade. They're hypocrites. It's a scam. Of course it is. It was back then so often. It often is today. Don't blame God for that. They're just front runners. And those who are in the forefront, they're not necessarily spokesmen for God, even though they're the loudest, even though they're in your face. Those who are in the forefront are just in the forefront. You see it every time you get a news camera out there, and maybe somebody did something truly heroic, and you want to interview them, and the cameras are rolling, and you want to know what this person who did something has to say, and there's always some clown sticking their face in there, go, hey, and they're in the forefront, and they're just a clown in the forefront. Okay, that's human nature. And it happens all the time. There's people who jump into the forefront, and nowadays, anyone can publish anything. Anyone can get on the TV or the radio and whatever. Those who are in the forefront are just in the forefront. Remind you also, Jesus said stumbling blocks are inevitable. There's always going to be somebody in the way, somebody who's just an offense. Stumbling blocks are inevitable, but Jesus said, don't you be one. Don't you get in the way of anyone. Let them follow Jesus. Next, I'd remind you that you're never alone, because you never are. Steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. He knows what you need. And Mark tells us that even though those in the forefront, those who led the way, were saying, shh, shut up, be quiet. Even there were those in the front doing that. Mark tells us that there were others in the middle of the crowd who were saying to this man, be of good cheer. Get up. He's calling for you. Arise. He's calling for you. In all that confusion, all that crowd, all the yelling, I'd like to be like those people when I grow up. I want to just be another person in the crowd saying, cheer up. Get up. He's calling for you. To be in the forefront, to be a leader, that's a ton of responsibility. If the Lord puts you there, then the Lord puts you there. If you're a parent, if you're a leader in any sense, okay, it's a lot of responsibility. But growing up is the desire of my life. And if I can help you in any way, if you find in your life you've messed up, if you find that so many things in your life are a mess, cheer up. He's calling you. If you find that your life is a mess because of messengers, because somebody else who said they were a spokesman for God, and then cheer up. He's calling you. And maybe most of you aren't there. I don't know. People who had their life really messed up by messengers, they don't go to church anymore. I know people that literally have to take medication and see a medical expert even when they deal with the Bible, not because it's the Bible, but because it's a book that used to be in another place used to abuse them. And they have panic attacks. And they still love God, and God still loves them, but he has to work with them in a different way because they've been abused through the system. But if your life has been messed up by a messenger, then I would say, cheer up. Be of good courage. Rise up. He's calling you. You don't have to go back to one of those places again. But follow the Lord. Don't follow the leaders. Follow the Lord. We're all time travelers. We're all on our way. You're not alone. And hardest of all, if it ever fit you, it's not the one whose life is a mess, because all of us, to some extent, you wake up, man, I've made a mess of my life. And some messenger has messed with my life. But you know what's the hardest of all? It's when you've messed up somebody else's life because you're the messenger. If you see that you've been the stumbling block, the very thing that Jesus said, it'd be better to put on a necklace the size of a washing machine and jump in the ocean than to mess up somebody's life in the name of God. than to stumble other people. There's forgiveness for that. Of course there is. But man, when you wake up to that, when you realize that other people have reactions to the very name of God and Jesus and Christianity because of things that I've said, who'd never want to be anywhere around things of God. They call themselves atheists because of stuff that I did. If in any way you find out that you've messed up people's lives because you knew so much and they were ignorant enough to believe that you knew so much. Man, that's heavy when you wake up to it. Now, if you haven't waken up to it, which some people they're still on their merry way. Gosh. But if ever you do wake up, and I just wanted to assure you, you're not alone. That's the hardest thing of all, to think that, you know what, I messed up somebody else's life because I was going to be their guru, because it somehow made me important to feel needed, and now I've done this to them. Be of good courage. Rise up. He's calling you. The Lord loves all. And there's no mess that we can make that the Messiah can't repair, can't restore. And yeah, it's a lot harder when you've hurt a lot of other people, especially in spiritual things. And whenever some people, I don't know when they're going to wake up, but man, I would not want to wake up in the knowledge that some people are going to wake up one day, realizing how many folks that you've misled simply because you thought you were the leader. I feel so safe in saying, you know what, I'm not your teacher, leader, rabbi, guru. I'm your brother. And that's what Jesus said. Call no man teacher, leader, rabbi, father, in a spiritual sense. You're all brothers. Oh man, that makes me feel good. Not because I'm a coward. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a coward. Because I'd rather just be someone in the crowd saying, be of good courage. Rise up. He's calling for you. Follow him. Follow him. He's going to take us home. We're going to wake up to a lot of rude awakenings, but when you wake up, get up. He's calling you. He'll forgive you. He'll cleanse you. He'll help you. He'll help you to find forgiveness with those that you've hurt, which is really what it's all about. Reconciliation within the whole family. It's a process, but it's a wonderful process in the end. It's a promise. He'll do it. So hope in him as always. Hope in him. Let's turn to him with a couple of songs.
In golden splendor sets the sun before the hours of darkness come. I hold this comfort through the night. My loss you wrapped in golden light will rise again in greater splendor. My golden light of yesterday. There is no death, just sweet remembrance of greater glory that's on the way. Of man, no wounding words, no crushing hand can take this hold on which I stand. We'll rise again in greater splendor with golden lights of yesterday. There is no death, just sweet remembrance of great glory that's on the way. Golden splendor sets the sun before the hours of darkness come. I hold this comfort through the night. My loss you wrapped in golden light will rise again in greater splendor. My golden light of yesterday. There is no death, just sweet remembrance of greater glory that's on the way. We'll rise again in greater splendor with golden lights of yesterday. There is no death, just sweet remembrance of greater glory that's on the way. There is no death, just sweet remembrance of greater glory that's on the way. There is no death, just sweet surrender to greater glory that's on the way.